Hi there, this is David from Honest IELTS. Um, when I was an IELTS examiner, we often had native speakers taking the exam. I was living in Britain at the time, so it was mainly British speakers, which seems unusual, but many of them wanted to emigrate to Canada and Australia, and by taking the IELTS exam, it would give them more points to help with their application to emigrate. But it was very interesting because often they didn't score very well on the exam, especially the speaking part, and especially in the sort of part one of the speaking exam for IELTS. This is the part where you just ask some sort of very general questions about familiar topics. The problem was that they didn't really answer the questions very fully. So, for example, I would ask, "Do you use your smartphone a lot?" And they would say, "Yes, yes, I do." That was it. I would sort of try to get them to say a bit more with my eyes, to try to encourage them to expand and say more about their answer, but they didn't. They thought these were real questions that they had to give real answers to. They didn't realize the purpose of the exam was to see what their English was like and to check, how good their English was, how good their vocabulary. Okay. So, the important thing here is that, yes, you need to improve your English for the exam, but also you need to understand what the exam is, what the parts of the exam are, and exactly what the exam is checking. So it may be possible for you to score better than native speakers if you just do a little bit of extra work to prepare properly. So there are two things. There's your English development, but also the awareness of the exam and how to approach the exam. Today, I'm going to focus on that specific part of the IELTS speaking exam, that part one section, and give you some useful tips for how you can approach that, how you can do it better, how you can develop your English for that section, and how you can practice for that section to make sure you are ready for it. Okay, great. Let's get started. Let's first make sure we know exactly the structure of the speaking part of the IELTS exam. It's in three parts. Part one takes around 4 to 5 minutes, and these are questions on familiar topics. Part two is what we call the long turn. This takes around 3 to 4 minutes. You have to prepare for 1 minute based on some information, and then you're expected to speak for about 2 minutes. Part three is a sort of a longer discussion. It takes around 4 to 5 minutes, and there are some more general questions based on the topic that was discussed in part two. So as you go through the exam, it becomes more challenging, more difficult, and more is expected of you. Part one, which we're going to look at today, focuses on familiar topics. They do this at the beginning to sort of help you relax and give you a little bit of chance to talk on topics that you may already know quite well. You are still being assessed during this part, but its purpose is also to help you relax a little. Okay, so what's my first tip? Now, the most obvious thing is to make sure you are familiar with some of the sort of the common topics that are discussed in part one. Now, you can't predict every single topic, and sometimes the topics were a little strange, but most of the time they will be sort of quite familiar topics around familiar areas. So things like work or study, your home or your hometown, free time, hobbies, housing, accommodation, sort of where you live, people and relationships, so sort of friends and family, health and fitness, sport and eating, technology, weather, environment. All of these are some of the most common topics that are likely to be discussed in this section. So be familiar with them. Make sure you know what kinds of topics they are so that you are ready for them. Okay, so my second tip for part one of the speaking exam is connected to the first tip, and that is to make sure you sort of build vocabulary, collocations, and phrases around these key topics like work and study and free time and technology. In another video, I talked about the importance of focusing on sort of everyday vocabulary in preparation for the IELTS, especially focusing on collocations and focusing on sort of the most frequent words in English. Learning these and learning these well are going to be much more useful than learning lots of unusual synonyms. It's better to focus on familiar vocabulary, but learning it better and relating it to the specific topics that will come up in the exam. Focus on the top sort of 2,000 or 3,000 words in English because they are the ones that are used most commonly and sound most natural when you're speaking. One thing I have done, which can help with this, with the help of AI, I built this sort of web tool, which is completely free to use. You can see here, called the Topic Vocabulary Bank. So what I've done here is along the top, you can see the different topics: hobbies, free time, home and hometown, work and study, travel and places. You can click on any of these and it will show you different vocabulary items that come from the most frequent words in English. If you click on them, so for example, destination, it will give you some useful collocations or phrases that are used with the word destination. For example, a popular destination, a dream destination. These are the more useful things to learn than trying to learn synonyms for destination. Again, they give you an example of an IELTS speaking answer there. Oh, it's a popular destination for tourists in the summer. This is much more useful to learn than trying to learn unusual vocabulary. And you can go through and do that with any of these words. Again, the important thing is that you are focusing the vocabulary around topics and you are learning everything about those words, not just the meaning, but the grammar of the words that go together with them, the prepositions that come after or before them. This is much more useful for you. Now, tip 3 for part 1 of the IELTS speaking exam is to practice responding to questions using the vocabulary items that we discussed for tip 2. This is not about memorizing answers. It's really about learning lots of sort of useful phrases and collocations and common expressions that can easily be used with different questions around that topic. You can use AI to help you with this, to both give you some of the language, but also some of the questions. You could use a prompt like this. Using only words from the top 3,000 most frequent words in English, generate a list of useful phrases, collocations, idioms around the topic of technology and media that would be useful to use in part 1 of the IELTS speaking exam. Also, generate some typical questions around that topic that might be asked in the exam so I can practice using those phrases. Let me just put that into an AI prompt. I'll put that into ChatGPT, as you can see here, and we'll see what it comes up with. Okay, you can see here what it's come up with. First thing it gives you is some useful phrases. And again, this is not sort of complicated language, but this is sort of accurate everyday language that you should be trying to use. So daily use my phone every day, spend a lot of time online, go online, be online, check my phone, check my email. Making sure you know all of these phrases is really, really helpful. There's some stuff on social media there, learning and work, buying online, problems with technology. I'll just go down those. Some idiomatic expressions that might be useful to know: time flies, keep in touch, pass the time, waste time. Some useful opinion phrases. And then here you've got some typical part 1 questions. So here are some ones about technology. How often do you use your phone? What do you mainly use your phone for? Some about social media, about news, TV and films, music, etc. So again, what you should be trying to do is to practice answering those questions after you've looked at some of this vocabulary and studied some of this vocabulary around that topic. So practicing the vocabulary around the topic, learning the vocabulary, and then trying to practice answering those questions. Don't memorize answers, but just make sure you're familiar with a lot of the language around it to make it easier to talk about it. Okay, tip 4 for part 1 of the speaking exam comes back to what I said at the beginning about native speakers not saying very much when responding in the IELTS exam and giving only short 1 or 2 word answers. It's really important just to keep talking as much as possible. You don't have to tell the truth. You can lie, you can invent. The examiner doesn't know you. The examiner doesn't really care about you. All they want to do is to be able to assess your English. So, if they ask you, do you like where you live? Don't just say yes or no. Try to give more information. It's okay if the examiner stops you and tells you to stop speaking. That may be a good sign that you've managed to talk for quite a long time. Okay, now tip 5 for part 1 of the speaking exam is about how we actually keep speaking when answering the questions. Yes, it's great to keep talking as much as possible, but how do we do that? One way is to sort of organize your answers by thinking about your answer in terms of the answer, giving a reason, and then giving an example. And this is a good way to make sure that you give longer answers. So, for example, the question, do you like where you live? We can say this. We can say, no, because my neighbours make life very difficult for us. They often have parties very late at night. It's very noisy. It's very difficult for us to sleep and get up for work the next day. We've tried to speak to them, but they don't seem to be responsive to what we want them to do. You can see I give an answer, no. I give a reason, because my neighbours make life difficult for us. Then I give more details, an example of exactly what the neighbours do that make it difficult. So if you think about it in those ways, it can make it easy to expand and lengthen your answer. Let's look at another example. The question, what's your favourite room in your house? You could say the living room, because it's very spacious and quiet. It's at the back of the house and looks over the garden, so you don't get noise from the road. It's a really nice place to sit and read or study. Sometimes I even sleep there because the sofa is very comfortable and it's warm in winter. You can see again, I gave the answer, I gave a reason, and then I provided more details and an example of why I like it. Okay, so there you go. Some quick ideas to help you with part 1 of the speaking exam. So just to recap, remember, learn the topics that are most common in part 1 of the speaking exam. Build useful vocabulary and phrases around those topics. Practice answering questions, maybe by using AI, and make sure you give longer answers by thinking in terms of the answer, a reason, and example. I hope you find that helpful. Maybe if you know someone who's taking the IELTS exam, do share this video with them. I've got a QR code here for the vocabulary activity that I showed earlier, where you can click on the different topics and get useful vocabulary. I have a WhatsApp group, and again, there's a link to that as well. And if you want to join that, I share useful tips and materials. If you're interested in taking a full speaking exam, maybe you are taking the exam soon, and you want to get a band score and some feedback, you can go to my website and book one with me, and I'll give you a full interview, full analysis of your speaking, and some useful tips on what you need to focus on for the exam. Okay, hope you found that useful, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye bye.